Hello, and welcome to this week's Bible study. I have the window open because it's getting hot, and I don't like the hot, so fuck the audio. It's too hot to have the window up. So hopefully nothing loud happens while I do this study. Fantastic. Okay, so anyways, without further ado, as always, I'd like to start with a deep breathing exercise. It's just going to be 3 deep breaths. So if you wouldn't mind doing that with me right now. So deep breath in and out. And in and out. And in and out. Fantastic. Now after the deep breathing exercise, I like to play a quiet worship song just to kind of meditate to, reflect on the lyrics, keep the deep breathing, maybe sing along if you know them, sway along, whatever gets you into that meditative headspace. I can't play it here for copyright reasons, but for those watching on YouTube, if you go in the description of this video, you'll find a link for quiet worship. And you can actually pause this video and go watch that video and listen to that. And then when you're done, you come back here and you do the rest of the Bible study. Yeah? That sound like a plan? Fantastic. So you can pause the video to go do that right now. And you're back. I hope you enjoyed it. It's a classic. So after quiet worship, I just like to do this little pre-written prayer thing. So I'm going to do that now. God, thank you for bringing us all here tonight. Please guide my tongue and heart during this teaching and guide everyone during the discussion and prayer time. Help us to be a reflection of your light by enlightening us to your ways with love, patience, and curiosity. We love you, God. Help us to love each other like you love us. In your name we pray. Amen. Right, without further ado, let's get into the Bible study part. And this is going to be the last chapter. We'll be using CSB's version, so that's fun. So, chapter 30 of Genesis in the CSB version starts out. When Rachel saw that she was not bearing children for Jacob, she envied her sister. "Give me sons or I will die," she said to Jacob. And so an interesting thing about this declaration is that it shows both Rachel and Leah were jealous of each other. Leah wanted Rachel's good looks and loving husband, while Rachel wanted to pop out sons like Leah was. Just a fun little PSA that everyone, even beautiful and popular people such as myself, have problems and things that they want that they'll probably never get, like friends. The grass is greener and all that jazz, so start focusing on the gifts that God did give you and be thankful for them and use them to their fullest potentials without snipping at other people while you do so. It's bad sportsmanship otherwise. Anyways, let's see how Jacob responds in the next verse, which is: Jacob became angry with Rachel and said, "Am I in the place of God? He has withheld offspring from you." So here we can see Jacob getting frustrated with being in the middle of sisterly squabbles, even with Rachel, whom he loves. He at least recognizes that Rachel's barrenness is between her and God, and got nothing to do with him. Rachel already has his devotion. Jacob worked 14 plus years with no pay at all just for her. He likely wouldn't have even worked a single day for Leah. But Rachel still wanted more from him, things that were beyond his control, all just to one-up her sister. It certainly was frustrating, to say the least. Let's see how Rachel responds to this in the next verse, which is... Sorry, my throat's a little dry. And I also have a cold. So I'll probably be coughing a lot throughout this. Anyways, next verse is, then she said, "Here is my maid Bilhah. Go sleep with her, and she'll bear children for me, so that through her I too can build a family." So Rachel gave her slave to Bilhah, to Jacob as a wife, and he slept with her. Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. So Rachel does the same thing that Sarah did with Abraham and gets her maid to be the surrogate mother on her behalf. A friendly reminder about this custom: Jacob was not married to Bilhah in the same way he was to Rachel and Leah. Bilhah was more of like a concubine who Rachel would decide when Jacob got to use, and any kids Bilhah produced would legally actually be Rachel's. There's also some debate on how this was practiced. Other more literal translations say that Rachel would let Bilhah bear children on her knees. Some think that this is metaphorical, while others think that it literally means Bilhah was on Rachel's literal knees, or at least her general lap region, while Jacob consummated with Bilhah, and when Bilhah was giving birth. It's hard to say which interpretation is true. Not enough evidence and such. But we can imagine a literal one would be more awkward. But either way, we can see that having children through surrogacy is not by any means a new thing. Science just figured out a way to make it less awkward. And if this was considered morally fine, and biblically people saw the child to be, in this case, Rachel's, then perhaps it shouldn't be considered so far-fetched to get children from other people these days. Whether through adoption or surrogacy, that child is yours and your partner's now. It still counts, despite what others may think. So even God adopts us when we give our lives to Him, and if it's good enough for God, it's good enough for us. I guess it kind of depends. If it's like super holy and it'll murder us, then maybe not that. But generally speaking, if God can do it, we can do it too. So let's see if Rachel acts as Sarah did when her maid had a kid for her, or if she'll be nicer in the next verse, which is, Rachel said, "God has vindicated me. Yes, He has heard me and given me a son." So she named him Dan, which means God is my judge. Rachel's slave Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Rachel said, "In my wrestlings with God, I have wrestled with my sister and won." And she named him Naphtali, which means my wrestling. So Rachel, unlike Sarah, rejoices when her maid conceives for her. Maybe her maid didn't rub it in her face as much, or maybe Rachel is just less of a bitch to the help. Maybe the main reason Sarah was bitter towards Hagar was because she confirmed it was Sarah who was the barren one, whereas Leah had already confirmed this for Rachel, hence the animosity towards Leah instead of Bilhah. But regardless, Rachel sees her adopted sons Dan and Naphtali as a blessing. Not just a blessing, but a victory over her sister, since the implication is that God judged her to be worthy of children. Same with Naphtali, whose name especially reflects how Rachel sees childbearing as a competition. Notice also how, despite the fact that she has only 2 adopted kids versus Leah's 4 biological kids, Rachel still uses Naphtali as proof that she won. Maybe Rachel thought more were coming, while Leah had stopped having kids altogether, so she'll catch up and get the last say, or in this case, the last child. So, does Leah take this jabbing silently? Let's find out in the next verse, which is, when Leah saw that she had stopped having children, she took her slave Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Leah's slave Zilpah bore Jacob a son. Then Leah said, "What good fortune!" And she named him Gad, which means luck or fortune. When Leah slaves Zilpah bore Jacob a second son, Leah said, "I am happy that the woman call me happy." So she named him Asher, which means happy. So Leah does not concede to Rachel's new tactic. She does not just let Rachel have this, because her having the most sons is the only thing she has going for her. She could not risk Rachel having more kids than her. So she, like a sister would, copies Rachel and gives her slave maid to Jacob also. I wonder if the slave maids ever talk shit together behind their mistress's back during all this. Like, they can't even name these kids coming out of them, and I doubt they had any ability to consent to surrogacy to begin with. I wonder if how they were brought up in that society made them feel like they were simply doing their duties, or if they had, like, any kind of resentment, like we would if we were in that situation. Hard to say. Historians rarely think to record the thoughts of bottom-rung employees, especially back then. Anyways, regardless, recall how Leah seems to make peace with just having her sons and praising God for blessing her with motherhood after having Judah in the last chapter. I didn't say that right. I'm going to repeat that because I didn't realize this was supposed to be phrased as a question. I don't memorize these words. Just so I read them a lot, but I don't memorize them. So anyways, regardless, recall how Leah seemed to make peace with just having her sons and praising God for blessing her with motherhood after having Judah in the last chapter. It's a little bit better. Well, I guess Rachel trying to catch up with her made her throw all that out the window and kick that sibling rivalry back into full swing. Gad is like the part 2 of Reuben, because she's basically just bragging about how lucky she is to get a son on the first try. And Asher doesn't mean happy because Leah hopes for his happiness. Asher makes her happy because he promotes her status within their tribe. Now, some might say that Rachel reignited this feud by doing this whole surrogacy thing and making Leah insecure again. But I think it really shows that Leah never stopped being insecure. You know, she didn't really find peace in her situation after Judah. She had just one. She had 4 sons while her sister had none. That was enough for her to retire happily. But Rachel turning up the heat brought her out of retirement. Now, some might say, nope, that's the same chapter. It really makes you reflect. Are you really over your situation, or is it just out of sight, out of mind? True maturity and peace is tested when that person or that trigger comes back. You had all this time to figure out how to handle a resurgence, but you just assumed you wouldn't have to deal with it instead. Never assume. Whatever toxicity comes out of you when you have to confront something, handle that shit. Taking the trigger away is just the start of your healing journey. Most of the time, it will come back whether you like it or not. And if you can't fall back on God's strength and remember everything you learned in therapy, if you just go back to that toxic state, you're not really over it. You haven't really healed, much less dealt with it. I know this one guy, he had these anger issues, and it got him divorced and his kids taken away, this whole spiraling mess. But he did the work, he went to therapy, and he's trying to reconnect with his kids again. You wouldn't think he had anger issues now. He's a really cool dude. It's really, honestly, amazing to see how God has worked in his life. Up until you mentioned his ex-wife. Then you get to listen to him go on this whole rant about how his wife left him and took the kids. Even considering his episodes of rage at the time, he can't even talk to her on the phone without getting all huffy, much less be in the same room with her. And I know the wife, she's cool, she's over it, she's sorry about what she should be sorry about, and she's ready to move on. But not him. And mostly, I just honestly feel sorry for the kids who are all adults now. They have to keep tiptoeing around the subject, trying not to upset their father, separate group chats and everything. They have to pretend their mother who raised them doesn't exist around him, or just let him trash talk about her while they just kind of sit and nod along. They can't invite them to the same events, like not even their own weddings. It's just sad. So deal with your triggers before they deal with you. Okay, at the very least, I have a plan ready if that shit comes up again. It might never stop agitating you, but at least it won't have complete control over you. It can't send you to a toxic place like it did with Leia. And speaking of her, let's see if she gets into any other wacky adventures in the next verse, which is... See, I told you I'd be coughing a lot. You didn't believe me. Well, I am. I'm coughing a lot. Reuben, that's the next verse. That's how the next verse starts, by the way. Reuben, dry throat. Yeah, hang on. Reuben went out during the wheat harvest and found some mandrakes in the field. When he brought them to his mother, Leah, Rachel asked, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." But Leah replied, "Isn't it enough that you have taken my husband? Now you also want to take my son's mandrakes?" "Well then," Rachel said, "he can sleep with you tonight in exchange for your son's mandrakes." So when Jacob came in from the field that evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, "You must come with me, for I have hired you with my son's mandrakes." So Jacob slept with her that night. By the way, mandrakes, for those wondering, are a type of root vegetable, which in those days were also called love apples because they were thought to increase fertility in women. So this might not just be pimping out your husband for some potatoes. It could be trying to get some strategic advantages as well. But it's still pimping your husband to his other wife, who is also your sister at the end of the day, which is just wild, you know. And also, imagine Jacob coming home excited to sleep with his hot wife, only to be told he has to sleep with his other wife because she gave her mandrakes. Not even like, I get you tonight either. Like, she hired her own husband to sleep with her. It's just wild on so many levels. It's not COVID, at least. That's the important part. As long as it's not COVID. But anyways, we can tell from this conversation that Leah and Rachel are pretty bitter about their competition. Rachel's just a bit too smug. And Leah feels like Rachel just gets everything. A typical sibling rivalry, if you ask me. Leviticus later banned sisters from marrying the same husband. And one has to wonder if this was the catalyst. Just imagine the kids growing up to watch this tension. You know, even Reuben is at this point trying to help his mom win by getting her some mandrakes, some fertility treatments. Sibling rivalries seem to be at the heart of most Jewish conflicts, I'm starting to notice. You know, from Isaac and Ishmael all the way to Judah and Israel. Just so much envy and pride. All struggles. This guy just walking around with his music like super loud. See, this is the downside of having the window down, is you can hear all the things. All the things. Okay, anyways, where was I? Even Reuben at this point is trying to help his mom win by getting some mandrakes. And sibling rivalries seem to be at the heart of most Jewish conflicts, I'm starting to notice, from Isaac and Ishmael all the way to Judah and Israel. There's just so much envy and pride. All humans struggle with these things, of course, and in fact, the Jewish people are meant to be a reflection of all of humanity. It's main representative for God anyways, but there definitely seems to be a theme in the faults. Anyways, let's see what buying your husband's affections with mandrakes gets you in the next verse, which is. God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. Leah said, God has rewarded me for giving my slave to my husband, and she named him Issachar, which means his reward will come. Then Leah conceived again and bore Jacob a sixth son. God has given me a good gift, Leah said. This time my husband will honor me because I have borne 6 sons for him. And she named him Zebulun, which means dwelling of honor. Later, Leah bore a daughter and named her Dinah, which means vindicated. So Leah gets pregnant 3 more times. She thinks God is rewarding her for her competitive behavior and pimping out her maid, though I suspect God just knew she wanted more kids than Rachel, and he just kind of let her have that. Now, even in the verse, it doesn't say God rewarded her, it says God listened. Even when it's not coming from a super healthy place, sometimes God fulfills your wishes, if only to prove to you that you weren't thinking big enough once you finally get what you want and don't feel any more fulfilled than you were. It does help fulfill the promise of Abraham having a shit ton of descendants at least. I do wonder, though, if they had all simply had full faith in God, if God would have blessed them regardless, and in a more clean way, that didn't get the maids involved, most likely. But existence is a collaboration with God, and humans are messy. And hey, shout out to Dinah, who no one ever cared to give like a real introduction for. You know, Leah's over here like, God has seen my misery and gave me Reuben, and God heard my cries and gave me Simon, and God gave me Levi so my husband would feel attached to me, and praise God for giving me Judah, and how lucky I am for getting Gad, and how happy I am for getting Asher, and God has rewarded me with Issachar, and God honors me with Zebulun, and also I have Dinah too, I guess. I see you, Dinah. I vindicate you with my validation. But yeah, Leah could have ended on a high note having Judah, whose only purpose was to praise God. But instead, she ended up with a bunch of kids whose names reflect the petty yearning for validation from a petty mortal man. How the mighty crumble. But let's not look down our noses too much at Leah. I'm sure we all felt like an overlooked underdog with something to prove at one point or another. We've all forgotten to put God's opinion of us above everyone else's before, including our own, and done drastic things for recognition. Let's take this as a cue for self-reflection and move on to see Rachel's last move in this chapter in the next verse, which is: Then God remembered Rachel. He listened to her and opened her womb. She conceived and bore a son and said, God has taken away my disgrace. She named him Joseph and said, May the Lord add another son to me. So the miracle child is born at last. And if y'all don't think I'm not going to be referencing the 2000 Christian classic Joseph, King of Dreams, any and every chance I get, y'all are wrong, and y'all have been warned, okay? I shall digress for now, though. Currently, I want to focus on this idea of God opening and closing wombs willy-nilly. Any true doctor can tell you that a lot has to happen in order for conception to occur. It takes a lot more luck for humans than we generally consider. Some people can have a bunch of unprotected sex and never get pregnant, and some people struggle with pregnancy even after fertility treatments. And yeah, genetics definitely plays a part, but even genetics are kind of luck of the draw. Anyone who remembers the Punnett squares in biology class knows, even when you know the parent's DNA, morally ambiguous gene editing aside, you're not going to know what the kid's DNA is going to look like until after conception. Even then, there's still a possibility for random mutations. My point is, it's mostly up to God when and how new life pops into existence, at least in the natural sense. So maybe people having fertility issues should consult God about it. Maybe it's just about timing, or maybe God wants to push you towards other forms of growing families, be it adoption or surrogacy, or even just some kind of mentorship. There's people out there, they just want an older person to kind of guide them through life, that's fine too. But never think that God thinks that you're like not good enough for having kids. If anything, God likely knows there's something better than childbearing for you specifically. Or at the very least, now's just not the time for childbearing. Not yet, at least. Talk to God about it if you're worried. Trust the process and find some peace on the matter best you can. You'll figure it out eventually. You're fine. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. But notice with Rachel, even with her miracle child, she names her only son something that means God will give, and asks for more sons because one isn't enough. She wants and expects more, probably just to keep one-upping her sister. On the other hand, on the one hand, I haven't said what the first hand was. On the one hand, this looks like greed, but on the other hand, it could be confident assertion. God has told us to be bold in our prayers. Have the audacity. Yet also don't be greedy or snide. There's a balance. In what to ask for in prayer. So it's hard to tell where Rachel lands on this one. So feel free to debate about it in the comments. For now, let's jump back to Jacob and see whatever roads at his feet in the next verse, which happens to be that you take. I'm sorry. I warned you. I did warn you. After Rachel gave birth to Joseph, this is the next verse, by the way. After Rachel gave birth to Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, "Send me on my way so that I can return to my homeland. Give me my wives and my children that I have worked for, and let me go. You know how hard I have worked for you." So, my guess, a son finally being born from his favorite wife was a sign to Jacob that he should go back to Canaan now. That's where he's supposed to be anyways. I do wonder if someone came to get Jacob in those 14 years to let him know that Esau had calmed down, but he couldn't leave yet because he had to get those wives first. Esau had said he'd kill Jacob after their father died, and Isaac is not dead at this point. So I think it's more likely that Esau possibly held a grudge all this time, or at least he never hinted that he was over what Jacob did. Maybe even probably he moved away from his parents, and so the subject could never even be broached in the first place. Even though the text never explicitly states it, a lot of scholars think Rebecca died before Jacob returned, and she was the only one who would ask for him back. So it's very likely Jacob intuited that something like that had happened, which would cause no one to come fetch him in the 15 to 20 years he was with Laban. Because of this, he had no way of knowing if it was safe to return. He always knew he had to return to Canaan at some point for the sake of the covenant, and possibly he thought or hoped that 2 decades was enough time for Esau to let it go. Let it go. Sorry. He probably knew there was still a risk going back with his family, especially with his family. But he likely sensed it was a good time to go, or he'd just rather deal with his murderous brother than the cheap and scheming Laban. So let's see how Laban takes this announcement in the next verse, which is... But Laban said to him, If I have found favor with you, stay. I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. Then Laban said, Name your wages, and I will pay them. So Laban, ever the capitalist, wants Jacob to stay because he makes a ton of money off of his labor. This is likely right near or right after the agreed upon 14 years of free labor, so possibly this is a further cue for Jacob to leave. So Laban naturally offers to actually pay him for his work if he'll stay. Let's see how Jacob responds in the next verse, which is... Oh, I hurt my nail. Oh. Anyways, next verse. So Jacob said to him, You know how I have served you and how your herds have fared with me. For you had very little before I came, but now your wealth has increased. The Lord has blessed you because of me, and now when will I also do something for my own family? And Laban asked, What should I give you? And Jacob said, You don't need to give me anything. If you do this one thing for me, I will continue to shepherd and keep your flock. Let me go through all your sheep today and remove every sheep with speckled or spotted, every dark-colored sheep among the lambs, and the spotted and speckled among the female goats. Quick note, CSB is the only popular translation that says female goats specifically. Others just say goats in general. I can't figure out why they made this translation decision. My best guess is that sheep and goat were like used more interchangeably back then. They can't actually be bred together. They're pretty closely related. So maybe a goat was a type of sheep or vice versa or something. I'm not sure. But if anyone knows, let me know in the comments. Okay, anyway, Jacob continues. Such will be my wages. In the future, when you come to check on my wages, my honesty will testify for me. If I have any female goats that are not speckled or spotted, or any lambs that are not black, they will be considered stolen. So Jacob would actually prefer to leave and start his own farm rather than working under Laban, but Laban insists that he will pay him, at least. Jacob had been working for free up to this point, and he came to Laban with seemingly nothing. It'd likely be a bad economic move for Jacob to leave Laban without something he can use to take care of his large family with. So Jacob decides to stay a little longer just to have some capital. So he does the smart thing, which is actually what most shepherds do. Oh no, my hair's all weird in the back. Oh no. Anyways, instead of asking for some kind of static money, which isn't by itself useful and can easily be stolen or devalued, especially back then, he asked for goats and sheep, which can increase in numbers by themselves. And if you're going to travel with them across desert, they're handy for food and clothing. And back then, everyone had a use for livestock, so money was more a middleman for buying livestock, if it was used at all. It was really more of a barter system back then. So if you did need money, or really just pieces of silver and gold, you could sell them easy peasy. A wise investment, if I do say so myself. It's kind of like getting stock instead of just straight money, but it's more of a guaranteed investment, or bonds. I guess it'd be bonds. I don't know. I don't know enough about finances. But yeah, that's why most shepherds in those days would ask for about 20% of the flock as their wage. But Jacob wants a specific color from Laban's flock, so it's easy to tell whose flock is whose. An important point for someone who has a tendency to cheat. Jacob is likely worried Laban will... Oh no, a bee. Oh no. I don't think it's in the van. But there was a bee, just so you know. But Jacob wants a specific color from Laban, says you told you. An important point for someone who has a tendency to cheat. Jacob is likely worried Laban will accuse him of stealing, and or maybe he thinks he can get a bigger flock this way. Laban likely had a mostly all-white flock, but as we'll see, Jacob can flip that around. But for now, let's see what Laban thinks of this deal in the next verse, which is, "Good," said Laban, "let it be as you have said." That day, Laban removed the streaked and spotted male goats and all the speckled and spotted female goats, every one that had any white on it, and every dark-colored one among the lambs, and he placed his sons in charge of them. He put a 3-day journey between himself and Jacob. Jacob, meanwhile, was shepherding the rest of Laban's flock. So, Laban agrees to Jacob's terms immediately, likely wanting to come off as agreeable or generous, but then he turns around and gives a big chunk of his multicolored and dark flocks to his sons and spaces them way out, so there's no chance of them intermingling. Technically, Jacob didn't say he couldn't do this. They were still Laban's flock before Jacob had a chance to go through them, and he can give them to whoever he wants until then. And there's still a chance these lighter, solid-colored flocks can produce dark and speckled ones with their recessive genes, but obviously it's a lot less likely for this to happen, and both Laban and Jacob know this. Clearly, Laban wants Jacob to stay as long as he can while still keeping most of his profits for himself by minimizing Jacob's wages. The oldest trick in the book, make it so they can't afford to leave. A tactic still used today for the majority of minimum wage workers. So let's see how Jacob responds to this in the last verse, which is, oh, by the way, quick note, probably most of Laban's flock were more on the lighter side, just because, that's the more profitable type of sheep. When you have like white cotton to work with, you can dye it whatever you want. You can't really do so much with like black cotton. It's just black cotton now forever. So, it was very fair of Jacob to ask for only like the weirdly colored ones. Just wanted to point that out real quick. Anyways, next verse is, Jacob then took branches of fresh Sorry, this is the last verse, I should say. The last verse, Jacob then took branches of fresh poplar, almond, and plainwood, and peeled the bark, exposing white stripes on the branches. He set the peeled branches in the troughs in front of the sheep, in the water channels where the sheep came to drink, and the sheep bred when they came to drink. The flocks bred in front of the branches and bore streaked, speckled, and spotted young. Jacob separated the lambs and made the flocks face the streaked sheep and completely dark sheep in Laban's flocks. Then he set his own stock apart and didn't put them with Laban's sheep. Whenever the stronger of the flock were breeding, Jacob placed the branches in the troughs in full view of the flocks, and they would breed in front of the branches. As for the weaklings of the flocks, he did not put out the branches. So it turned out that the weak sheep belonged to Laban, and the stronger ones to Jacob. And the man became very rich. He had many flocks, female and male slaves, and camels and donkeys. Alright, so a lot to unpack in this last part. So Jacob also works within the system Laban has tailored and flips it against him. Laban isn't the only capitalist in this story. This really honestly reminds me of all of those like lucky bastards that were able to grind their way out of poverty. And I emphasize the lucky part because even though Jacob used this branch trick, we find out in the next chapter that Jacob had a vision from God about his sheep mating, and it likely guided him towards how to go about this breeding practice. Not all of us are going to get a vision from God that saves us from poverty and entrapment. God doesn't bless you with monetary gains just because you believe he should. God gives wealth to those he knows can do something meaningful with it or learn from it. Perhaps inspire others too. He uses wealth for his purposes, and not everyone fits that purpose, unfortunately. Not pre-rapture, anyways. Personally, I think it's more productive to try to create an economic system that's incapable of producing poverty in the first place instead of grinding your life away and hoping that's enough for you to make it. God doesn't control the economic systems we create and participate in at this moment in time. He will when he destroys this world and creates a new one that's like an actual utopia. But until then, it's up to us what kind of world we want to be a part of, because that's free will, bitches. And as Christians, I think it's our job to show the world that the new Eden, the afterlife, what that could be, what it is we have hope in. Now, obviously, we're never going to be able to make a perfect utopia. It's just not possible with the way human nature is. But we can get close. And at the very least, I think we can get non-believers to be inspired by us when they see us trying to create a world that is fair and just for everyone. They can see God moving through us when we fight for them. There's so many Christians that are way too into unregulated capitalism. I can't even say it. That's how horrible it is. They think it's the most empowering thing, that anyone can be anything, and it's all about freedom and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. And in fairness to them, there are things that I like about capitalism. I like that you can buy your own things and nobody can really tell you what to do with them. I like that somebody can have a cool idea, and if other people think it's cool, it can start a whole giant business. I think it's cool how we as a society get to decide what deserves our attention, and what deserves wealth, or success, mainstream or niche. There's definitely an albeit chaotic power to the lower classes, that the lower classes of people have here. But as we're getting into the later stages of capitalism, we're seeing how the people at the top are getting more and more power, and how they are using that power for manipulating and oppressing the people on the bottom by making the path for financial freedom harder and harder, inflating prices more and more just because they can. They're lobbying for laws that protect them and destroy the have-nots. And they're gaslighting us into thinking that everything is fine and it's actually your fault that your life sucks. And there may be some personal responsibility involved here, but like Laban taking away the multicolored dark sheep, the odds of success are stacked against us by the people that we give authority to. Now, in this instance, Jacob managed to come out on top anyways. But could anyone in that situation do the same thing? Is everyone going to have that natural wisdom and the blessing of God claw their way out of a rigged system? Realistically, no. We love hearing these stories about how the underdog tricks and defeats their oppressor, and the Bible is full of stories like that. It's kind of the main theme of it. But even in the Bible, the end goal is not to have everyone on an individual level defeat their own oppressors again and again for all eternity. It's not to have to continue to overcome adversity all the time forever. The end game is that God removes the oppressors and adversity completely, and we all get to finally and truly live as equals in peace and prosperity for all eternity. These stories about oppressors being overthrown are meant to hint at how God is going to do that, how he's going to overthrow all evil once and for all in the end. That is our hope as Christians, and it is our calling to show the world this hope. Not tell, show. Show through our actions that we care about the poor and the downtrodden, and we are fighting for them like how God is fighting for them. Not just individually, but politically too. Think bigger. That is what sharing the love of God looks like. And in this moment of time, there is an economic aspect that to this that we can't overlook anymore. And I want to be clear. I'm not advocating strongly for any particular economic system. I think even things like communism and socialism have their blind spots too. But I think they have the right idea, and we shouldn't let our oppressors manipulate us into thinking that no aspects of either communism or socialism are helpful for the working class. I think at the very least, there should be a social safety net paid by tax dollars, mostly by the rich, where people can get free or cheap housing, good and affordable education, free healthcare, free or cheap healthy food. Any basic living necessity should be available to everyone for little to no cost. That safety net isn't available under laissez-faire capitalism, and that simply isn't right. As Christians, we're called to take care of people in need. Charities are nice, but they're not, but they're ineffective, or else we wouldn't be having these problems. We need to, as a community, support the most vulnerable, and the best way to do that is through funding social programs with our taxes and our votes. That's honestly the best way to reinvest into your community. We can't rely on the kindness of an out-of-touch billionaire anymore. Not when it's causing suffering. Christians don't encourage suffering. It's an oxymoron. We need regulations and transparency and the ability to say no with our voting power, or yes, depending on the situation. We can have that with government programs, but not with charities. So let's come together. Let's try something new, something that's been proven to work in other countries, or even completely new ideas. Let America be the melting pot of good ideas so we can show the world what a truly God-fearing country looks like. Okay? Anyways, that was a bit of a tangent. Let's take a step back. And examine what Jacob actually did with Laban's flock. Because that stick thing was fucking weird, right? Well, at first glance, someone might assume it's just some weird miracle thing that God made work for just this situation in particular, and that might be slightly the case. However, those more familiar with the text will know God never told Jacob directly to put some peeled stick in the water like he normally would with random ass miracles like this. He does give him a vision in the next chapter, but it's only of the multicolored and dark flock mating. A lot of scholars think this is how Jacob knew which ones from the flock were more likely to reproduce dark or multicolored flocks. Like which ones had the necessary recessive genes to get the right color, even if they themselves were not the right color. Not that Jacob knew anything about recessive genes. God just showed him which ones to breed to get the desired color, and we just have a better idea of how that scientifically could work out in retrospect. But that still doesn't explain what was up with the peeled stick. So I did some digging and discovered that the branches used come from trees that have these particular nutrients which can affect this particular gene for pregnant mammals, and at least for mice and dogs, can actually change the color of the offspring to a darker shade than the parents. And beyond the selective breeding that Jacob did, the branches also had nutrients that helped to make the offspring strong, like prenatal vitamins. And one of the best ways for the animals to get those nutrients is by soaking a peeled branch in the drinking water. Now, to be fair, I only skimmed the article for that answer. I ain't no scientist, and I ain't got time nor energy for a deep dive research. But Wikipedia at least confirmed that that was a thing, so that's good enough for me. I will, of course, be linking the articles talking about this in the sources category of the description. It's the two that are not an Enduring Word or Bible reference article. Definitely let me know in the comments if you find contradictory research. But, oh, there's a siren. Can you hear it? I can hear it. Anyways, but if this is the case, We still don't know how Jacob knew to do this. Maybe it was an inside shepherding secret kept even from the landowners like Laban, who hired them to tend their flocks. Maybe God simply compelled Jacob to do it. Who knows? It will forever be a mystery, probably. And that mystery is where we will end this week's study. As always, feel free to leave any questions or comments down below, and certainly feel free to leave any prayer requests, thankful or yearning. I am currently, as of this recording, able to respond to all and add any requests to the prayer request list. But for now, let's review the prayer requests that we have and then praying with those people. Okay? My jaw hurts. That was a lot of talking. Okay, so our new thing is we're always going to pray for forgiveness of our sins, and we're always going to pray that God fills us with himself. That sounded sexual. He fills us with his fullness. Just be filled with the Spirit of God. That kind of thing. We're also going to be praying for Dr. Heiser and Trey. Dr. Heiser has cancer. They're from the Naked Bible podcast, by the way. Dr. Heiser has cancer, and we want him to not have cancer. And Trey is probably fine, but he did have COVID, so we're just praying that he doesn't have long-term effects of COVID. And then I always like to pray for myself also. I'm not doing too bad. I've been dealing with some anxiety lately, but it will probably pass eventually. So I'm just going to keep praying that I am able to strengthen my relationship with God, get better about the whole praying thing, and yeah, that's pretty much it. Okay, so we're gonna do the weird thing now. Okay. Let me just cough first. Get some water. Get some water. Sweet, delicious water. Okay. Hey God, how's it going? I would just like to pray that you forgive us of our sins. Forgive us of the sins that we do know about, and I pray that you help us to do better. I also pray for the sins that we don't know about. Help us to recognize those sins in our lives and then help us do better. That would be great. I'd also like to pray that you fill us with your fullness. All of you, less of us. That whole thing. That's something that helps us, and it's good. It's good for our bones and such. I'd also like to pray for Dr. Heiser. I just pray that he stops having cancer, or if he continues to have cancer and eventually succumbs to it, that it's peaceful and he's able to, do it with his head held high. He seems like he's taking it like a champ. So just pray that you continue to give him that strength. But whichever way you're taking this, I just pray that you give Dr. Heiser and his family and friends the comfort, that you are in control of this. Although I'm just saying, our preference is that he doesn't have cancer. That's what we would prefer. So if that could be the thing, if that's possible, do that. I also want to pray for Trey, that his health also remains good, and that he emotionally is doing good, and that he can also feel strengthened by you. And as for myself, I just like to pray that I continue to work on my relationship with you. I just pray that I get better at doing it. It would be great if you could remind me that you exist more often, because I forget a lot. It just kind of helped me to get better at the whole praying thing, and all that fun stuff. Just help me to be better at being a Christian. That would be cool. And that's about all I have to pray about. So thanks. See you next time. Okay, bye. Amen. Such is the end of our Bible study. As always, I like to end with a loud worship song, something we can dance along to, something we can move and groove to. Can't play it here for copyright reasons, but if you go into the link of the description, if you're on YouTube, there should be a link for a loud worship song, and you can go listen to that and have a good time. End it on a high note. Then, if you're on Facebook, just scroll up. It should be right there. Okay? Okay. Well, that's it. Okay. Bye.